Okay, so we're going to, it's called squaring up, which is basically cutting this down now, ready so that we can apply our binding. Now, I'm going to actually do a couple of different methods for it. I'm going to first of all do it with a technique where I'm just using a ruler and scissors, because I'm going to assume, okay, that you don't have a rotary cutter and a quilter's ruler. Okay, so I'm going to show you both so you can kind of just compare. Obviously you need to work with the tools you've got, but if you can decide to take this further, then I think that doing it this way is a lot easier. Okay, so how do we square it up? Now when you buy these as a kit, I have these fabrics have already been squared up. However, once you start stitching into them, and particularly if you start to play around with knots, you can see on possibly on your own sample, I think that comes up on here, you can see that's no longer actually a really nice flat edge. So this is kind of here to act as a starting point and as a guide, but I certainly wouldn't just assume that that's a perfectly straight line. If you are wanting a perfectly straight line, if you're not bothered about that, you can even have curves on them, but this is the starting point. So I'm going to show you straight edged, squared up technique here. Okay, so first of all, the technique is if we are going to be using scissors and a rule. Okay, what you want to do is you want to look at your design and find which edge are you going to start off from. Once you've cut that edge, then everything else will be squared according to that. Okay, so if I cut this at this angle, for example, then to make it square or rectangular, I will then do my next line according to this. Okay, so I want to get this first line as straight as possible, but I do think that most of the most amazing quilts are not exactly square anyway. so I think there's always a little bit of movement. These are kind of like living, almost living, breathing things, textiles. They move, don't they? So if it was perfectly square, it wouldn't necessarily make sense. So I'm just going to take this as my line. I've got, you can just use a biro for this. This is going to be kind of right on the edge. You're not going to be able to see it. I've got just a fabric pen here. So I'm just going to use, and I'm just drawing it all the way up. Okay. And hopefully I can see that still, yes. So I'm just going to put that to the side. And so this is my first line, okay. Now you can see I'm pretty much actually cutting along that fabric edge. That fabric edge seems to be, on this side at least, pretty straight. What you don't want to do is cut too far away from the front panel edge. You want to, if anything, just cut slightly into it to make sure that you've got everything's going to get bound in properly with the binding. Okay. So I've got my first edge, okay, and I have my cutting mat here ready for showing you the other technique, but just quite handily I've got a straight line there, so I can see that that pretty much, let's just sort you out. Not happy with you up there, you're not straight, are you? There we go, we've got this straight edge going down here now, okay, and that lines up nicely on my cutting mat, which has nice lines all over it for me. Okay, so now I've cut this first edge, I can now turn round the quilt or the panel and I can do my next line, okay? And this is where it gets more tricky. The first line is kind of easy unless you do it wrong. But the first line is pretty straightforward, okay? My next line, I want it to be at 90 degrees to this line here, okay? Now I find if I just use a ruler, I don't know if that's actually 90 degrees there, and if I don't have a protractor or a tool that tells me that that's 90 degrees. What I do use is a book. So I put my book down, and I know this is in kind of reasonable quality, and I'm assuming this is pretty much 90 degrees here. So what I'm doing is I'm lining up the bottom of my book with the edge of my fabric, okay? And then what I can do is I can then put my ruler up against the book, so I know that that line there is going to be at 90 degrees to there. Now if I move my book further down, okay, and my ruler comes down to here, I would cut it there. But what I'll do is I kind of just maneuver the two until I can see. I tend to try to keep as much of my quilt as possible, so I like to have the least amount of waste. So I'm just going to shifty the book up a wee bit more. Let's get my 90 degrees, and you can see that that's not, if I had just measured, just done it by eye, I probably wouldn't have made that as my straight line. Okay, so I'm just going to move the book out of the way. Nice book, by the way, by Merchant and Mills. Just going to draw my line down there, and then I can cut it. Okay, so you always have your starter line, starter edge, and then all the other edges are cut according to that line. Okay, so hopefully you've got a reasonable pair of scissors to do with this with. These are my fabric scissors. If you haven't got fabric scissors, then that's going to make life a little bit more difficult for you, I have to say. Okay, so the next line I would do exactly the same. I'd use my book to line up there, and I would use my ruler to do that. However, I'm going to change tactics now and show you how I would use my quilting ruler. Okay, and I've got this just little handle that I've added on just to make it a bit easier. You don't have to have that. Okay, so now we can see, so one of the great things about a quilting ruler, okay, now I can work according to all the lines on my mats, but I just want to say at the moment I'm just working according to the ruler. Using the mat with the ruler is a whole other kind of like ball game, okay? So I've just got my fabric on my mat. Please don't worry about what I'm doing with these lines here, because I'm ignoring them. Okay, so we've got our 90 degree line there, and because I've got one of these quilting rulers, so one of the differences, let me just take that off, I can't remember what I was marking for, but it's gone now, is they have all the markings on them. So let me zoom in. We haven't come across one of these before. Okay, this is the Omni Grip brand. Okay, so I think that might be upside down. So it's the Omni Grip. Okay, now what it's got on it's got all these different measurements and lines, and these are all in inches. So if you're a centimetre kind of person, then you might be slightly challenged by this because it's all in inches. A lot of quilters work in inches, particularly as, I mean, it's so big in America and they work with inches, so it's kind of transposed over here. Okay, as a weaver, I'm perfectly happy working in inches or centimetres, and I actually go between the two all the time, as you may have noticed as I'm talking. So it's got all these lines on, so you can see I've lined up the edge of my fabric, and I can actually check and see that pretty close, this line along here. Okay, let me zoom back out again so you can see what I'm doing here. Okay, the line that's on the ruler here, okay, lines up perfectly with this edge here, so I know that I've got this 90-degree angle here. So what I want him to do now is cut this edge. Now, I don't know if you can tell that on the camera, but this definitely buckles around here, okay, and comes out more here. So we are going to lose more of this edge, okay? So I'm going to move my ruler over, and so I'm using, instead of using the book, I've got my guides on here, my lines here, okay? So I'm using this guide here to line up along the bottom of this side of fabric. So this was the second side that got cut, okay? So I'm always working with my cut edges. And I can see, I don't know if you can see, along there, I've caught in some of the yellow fabric here, but as soon as I get to about here, it disappears. So I know I need to move it a bit further over because I need to catch all those edges in. So that's the point I pointed out earlier on, that it goes in. So that's the point I need to go to. So I'm just making sure I'm lined up here, and this just cuts into that bit there, okay? I'm going to go a little bit further over. There we go. Okay, I think it's going to cut off that corner of a plique as well, but that's okay. There we go. So definitely double check, triple check, measure 17 times, cut once. There we go. So just use this rotary cutter, which has a blade on it, which goes round. You get different sizes of them. This brand is the Alpha brand, so I can just pull that off. Ta-da! Dead straight line. And then I'm going to come round to here. Now this is my awkward bit because I've got the knot work down here and it's pulled the fabric in different ways. But with my quilter's ruler or my book and ruler and a pen, I can still just measure off to check that I'm at all the right angles, and I can see that that lines up on that side as well. Slightly not square, but it's okay. And take the safety latch off, push that through, and there we have our piece all ready for doing the binding with. And that's what we will do in the next video.